in the northern part of Mali. The National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad (MNLA), one of the main armed groups operating in northern Mali, has reaffirmed its commitment to a merger of the armed groups of ex-rebels who signed a peace agreement with Bamako in 2015.
In reality, the merger is a requirement of the current context. There was a first start with the organization of the movement. This is already a first step towards the unification of the movements so that they're even stronger, so that there is no contradiction between the movements that makes up the whole group.
The move intends to bring the coalition into a single unit with a common political objective.
I believe that when these three movements unite as a single entity, this will give additional strength in all areas. This will improve us in areas of politics, especially in security matters, in our regions, and especially our people, who are always subjected to extrajudicial abuses by these extremist groups.
The move comes just days after the announcement of Malian authorities to integrate 26,000 ex-rebels into its national army.
Tigray region say they are open to negotiations with the federal government but determined to continue advancing into northern Ethiopia as long as its military reinforcement continue to threaten their region. Moni Manyo has the rest of that story for us.
Journalists have no access to northern Ethiopia, making independence verification impossible. The mobile and internet networks are also unreliable, and the situation on the ground is difficult to assess. In recent days, according to sources, the rebels have advanced about 50 kilometers south of the Tigray border into the neighboring Amhara region and southeast into the Afar region. "We are fighting a defensive war and we remain open to negotiations," said a spokesman of the rebel authorities in Tigray, Getachew Reda, in a press briefing broadcast on the internet, again accusing the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of having broken the truce observed last March. He explained that after initially defending their positions, the rebels had now launched a counter-offensive. Abiy continues to make miscalculation after miscalculation by continuing to send reinforcements. "We will continue to neutralize them, which will probably drive us further and further into the Amhara region," he warned. He threatened that they are not particularly interested in controlling this area, but as long as the forces unleashed against them continue to threaten the security of their people, they will continue to take appropriate measures to neutralize them, and that will determine where they stop. The Ethiopian government recalled its efforts in favor of peace and the concrete measures taken in this sense and said it was once again determined to peacefully resolve the conflict, which has once again been triggered by the terrorist rebels in Tigray.
Let's go over to South Sudan, where nearly 22,000 men and women drawn from the main parties as well as the South Sudan Opposition Alliance have swore an oath of loyalty in a ceremony held under tight security, as our student journalist on internship Iwane Epole completes this story for us.
Over 22,000 men and women drawn from the main parties as well as the South Sudan Opposition Alliance took part in the proceedings held on Tuesday, which were scheduled to take place in 2019 according to a peace deal. Authorities in the country, notably the President Salva Kiir Mayardit and the UN representative in the country, praised the new developments made.
Out of all the chapters of the agreement, the graduation of the unified forces under Chapter 2 has been the most challenging and yet the most important.
Over 200 of your comrades have died in the 18 training centers. Some died because of disease and no medication. Some died because of hunger, as food was not available.
Mr. Nicholas Haysom, a special representative of the Secretary General and head of the United Nations mission in South Sudan, affirmed that a united defense force is one of the most visible and meaningful expressions of national unity.
A unified defense force is one of the most visible and meaningful expressions of national unity, especially in societies emerging from conflict. Its establishment will, on account of its inclusivity and diverse representation, symbolize the national identity of South Sudan.
The ceremony comes weeks after the country leaders appointed to run a transitional government announced that they will remain in power 2 years beyond an agreed deadline, sparking international concern. It should be noted that since achieving independence from Sudan in 2011, the world's youngest nation, South Sudan, has been unsteady from crisis to crisis, battling flooding, hunger, ethnic violence, and political instability, amongst others.
Politics beginning from Kenya, where the Supreme Court of Kenya has ordered the recount of ballots cast at 15 different polling stations during the August 9 presidential election. The order is among several decisions rendered public on Tuesday as the post-election hearing opens. As you tell us, Fotso.
The recount request from Raila Odinga and his running mate Martha Karua was for 15 polling stations in 4 counties: Kericho, Nandi, Nyandarua, and Mombasa. The first 3 counties voted heavily for Ruto, while Mombasa residents vote mainly for Odinga. Judges said the recount must be done within 48 hours. The court also told Kenya's Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, the IEBC, to provide the official voters' registries and some election-related equipment for examination. Chief Justice Martha Koome said after looking at the arguments submitted by Odinga and his lawyers, the judges will be ruling on several questions. The first issue is whether the technology deployed by ABC for the conduct of the 2022 general election met the standards of integrity, verifiability, security, and transparency to guarantee accurate and verifiable results. Koome said issue number 2 is whether there was interference with the uploading and transmission of Forms 34A from the polling station to the IEBC public portal. Issue number 3 is whether there was a difference between Forms 34A uploaded on the IEBC public portal and Forms 34A received at the National Tallying Center and Forms 34A issued to the agents of the polling station. The Supreme Court will also examine whether there was discrepancies between the total vote cast for the presidential candidate and for other electoral positions, such as the governors and senator. In addition, the judges will examine whether Ruto got more than 50% of the vote and whether there were irregularities and illegalities in the county's process that could affect the result. Odinga is challenging the official election result that saw him lose by a small margin. Gutu got 7.8 million votes, while Odinga got 6.9 million.
Liberian President George Weah has come under fire a year ahead of presidential election for his inadequate response to the indictment of 3 state officials linked with corruption and embezzlement allegations. As you tell us, Moni Manyo.
The charges highlight the endemic corruption that plagues the poor West African country, ranked 136th out of 180 by the anti-corruption NGO Transparency International in its 2021 report. The U.S. State Department describes widespread government corruption as an obstacle to investment and development that fuels, for example, the lack of electricity and roads in a report on the business climate in Liberia in 2022. The fight against corruption as well as the fight against poverty was one of the main promises that contributed to the election of the former football star in December 2017. In his inaugural speech in January 2018, George Weah said he had been given a mandate to end corruption in public service. He said, and I quote, "I promise to honor that mandate." However, his presidency has been troubled by a number of scandals. Mr. Weah decided to suspend the 3 officials involved as he considers the charges against them serious. A simple suspension is not enough, according to main opposition leader Alexander Cummings. Meanwhile, Regional Watch for Human Rights, a human rights NGO, in a statement urged Mr. Weah to sack the 3 officials involved. The U.S. Treasury has sanctioned the First Minister of Presidential Affairs, Nathaniel McGill, who also heads the presidential cabinet. It accused him of bribing business leaders, receiving kickbacks from potential investors, and accepting kickbacks for bringing contracts to companies in which he has an interest. He appropriated public assets for personal gain and also used warlords to threaten his political opponents, the U.S. Treasury added. The second, Sema Sirenius Cephus, Attorney General, is accused of having developed close relationships with suspects in criminal investigations and of having received bribes, in exchange for which he had files on money laundering closed. The Third National Port Authority Chief Bill Twenway is accused by the Treasury of orchestrating the diversion of $1.5 million to a private account. The U.S. voice carries weight in Liberia given the historical and current relationship between the two countries and the weight of the Liberian diaspora on the other side of the Atlantic. The U.S. accusations comes a year before the presidential elections scheduled for the 10th of October 2023.
Let's now make a stop in the Central African Republic, where a plan by the government to allow foreigners to acquire citizenship and land using a new cryptocurrency has been ruled as unconstitutional by the country's top court. What are the reasons advanced towards this move is the content of this report.
When the Central African Republic adopted Bitcoin as a legal tender, many were surprised, but the government argued that it will secure an independent financial future for the country, given that, according to an estimate from 2020, 9 out of 10 Central Africans do not have access to the internet, which is a prerequisite for using Bitcoin. That, along with a patchy and unreliable electricity supply, led to some to question whether the CAR was the right country to test the theory that cryptocurrencies were set to replace traditional forms of money. Despite a sharp fall in Bitcoin prices, sales of the initial $21 million on offer have been slow, with just over 5% of the target bought in the hours after its launch on July 21, 2022. Meanwhile, according to the Sango website, foreign investors could obtain citizenship for $60,000 worth of a cryptocurrency, with the equivalent Sango coins held as collateral for 5 years and e-residence for $6,000 held for 3 years. The same article goes further to say investors would also be able to buy a 250 square meter plot of land for $10,000 with the Sango coins locked away for a decade, and that's where complications stepped in, as the Constitutional Court ruled that nationality did not have a market value and that residency required a physical stay in the country. In a 2-page document signed by the Minister of State, Director of Cabinet at the Presidency of the Republic, Obed Namsio, argues that allowing foreigners to acquire citizenship and land using a new cryptocurrency is unconstitutional, according to Law Number 22/004 of April 22, 2022, in Article 49 of the Constitution of March 30, 2016. The release equally calls on President Faustin Archange to ensure the effective use of Sango coin without jeopardizing the integrity of the Republic. Many bookmakers have termed the court ruling on the ambitious crypto project as unclear. It is therefore a responsibility shouldered by the vision bearer to clear the air about his project by convincing his compatriots the more on what the nation stands to gain or lose with the Sango coin project.
The international community of the Red Cross has raised concerns over the high number of missing children in the continent, which as at now stands at 40%. That is giving us 64,000 children who have been reported missing throughout the African continent. Our reporter Mwanzi read through that report, and this is just what she had to pen down at the end of the day.
More than 25,000 children are missing across the African continent, according to the International Committee of the Red Cross. This represents 40% of the 64,000 cases of missing persons in Africa. The leading cause of these disappearances include insecurity, with armed conflicts triggering it, thereby causing thousands of people, including children, to cross borders in search of a safe haven. During their travels, the children face a number of risks, such as exploitation, violence, psychological distress, and disappearance. According to the non-governmental organization's regional director, the 25,000 cases recorded do not reflect the full extent of this tragic and often overlooked humanitarian problem, and there is no doubt that there are many children who are missing but are not documented. To help curb this flaw, the African Union organized a meeting on coherent and effective approach among African states to prevent disappearances and better inform families about the fate of missing persons in the continent. However, the number of documented cases of missing persons in the continent continues to rise.
The African continent, like most countries abroad, are facing a deepening food crisis triggered by the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, which of course is counting 6 months as of now, and of course has endangered wheat and corn supplies. The big question is, how can we solve this problem? Our reporter Njix Nabise attempts a response.
Like most countries abroad, African nations are facing a rapid food crisis triggered by the war in Ukraine that has endangered wheat and corn supplies. This crisis, coupled with climate change, has pushed about a quarter of Africans towards hunger, according to reports. Some time ago, the international community of the Red Cross warned that an estimated 346 million people in Africa, which is a quarter of the population, was facing a food security crisis from the price hikes plaguing the continent. The causes, according to Dominic Steelhart, head of global operations, are conflict and drought. The acute food crisis in most African countries has before now emanated from ongoing armed conflicts. With Russia and Ukraine being the global exporters of wheat, developing countries like Egypt, Nigeria, Sudan, Libya and a host of others have deeply been affected with increase in prices of bread, fast foods, and when there is a supply gap, most African countries turn to feel the impact. Most recently, a UN chartered ship loaded with Ukrainian wheat destined for millions at risk of starvation in Ethiopia arrived in Djibouti on Tuesday. The grains are expected to reverse the food shortage in Burundi, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan and Uganda. In line with what Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara said via his representative, Patrick Zachi, at the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, Africans given our endowments could take this global crisis to an advantage in a bid to foster growth and development on the continent.
That last report there by Njix Nabise put a wrap to today's English primetime newscast on For You Television. We want to thank you all immensely for your kind attention. Until we meet again tomorrow for what must have made news in Africa. From Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, passing through Abidjan, Ivory Coast. God bless Moral and Africa. Bye-bye.